Three former Conservative Home Secretaries have warned Michael Gove, he's the Housing and Levelling Up Secretary, against using extremism to score political points. That's before he is due to announce his new anti-extremism plan this week. Well, I'm joined now by former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood, who's a Conservative MP. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning to you.
Thanks for that. I say Conservative MP, just checking, you're not planning to go defect over to Reform UK. Worried about your seat, are you?
No, not at all. I mean, I understand why you want to focus on that, but it's no surprise that Lee Anderson has made this journey. You touched on the fact that he started in the Labour Party. The Conservative Party has won elections again and again and again in our history, not over the decades, but over the centuries, because we've been a centre-right party that appeals to the electorate as a whole. Any party, Labour or Conservative, that moves to the extreme, moves to the fringe, then removes themselves from getting elected. Labour proved this with Jeremy Corbyn. So I think the fact that Lee Anderson was feeling perhaps not part of the fold and feels more at home with the Reform Party, I think both the Reform Party will be pleased. I think quietly the Conservative Party will be pleased as well. It has been a huge distraction over the last number of weeks.
Well, yeah, it certainly has been a lot of focus on it. I think you should talk about this, like Reform UK as the fringe. I think a lot of Conservative voters would say Lee Anderson represents Tory values. He's not the fringe at all. He's saying what a lot of them are thinking. And actually, the pandering to the woke ideologies, failure to take action, putting taxes up, OK, then occasionally taking them down, not standing up on issues like, again, talking the talk but not walking the walk when it comes to the pro-Palestinian marches and other extremism, that actually it is Lee Anderson who speaks for the average voter, average Conservative voter in this country, and not actually the government or the party that he is leaving.
No, I don't agree with that at all. Leadership is about taking people to the places that we need to go, not just playing on the anger and building up on the populism. It's very easy for me to take everything that you've just said and say, I agree with you. These are problems. My goodness, nobody is doing anything about it. It's harder to then come up with the solutions of actually what you then need to do. And the difficult budget that we've had there is based on the fact that we've just had 14 years of two seismic events that no government would anticipate to deal with, namely the COVID crisis, £400 billion that we didn't expect to spend, and then Ukraine as well, which is a couple of £200 billion more. That's money that we clearly would like to spend elsewhere, clearly like to see in reducing taxes and so forth. But the fact that we now have inflation going down to 2% when it was up in double figures, that with confidence in business is now growing and investment is returning back to the UK, and we're leaning in on some of those bigger international issues, such as what's going on in the Red Sea and indeed in Ukraine as well. This Prime Minister has navigated us back into easier economic climate and indeed into calmer political waters. That's the bigger picture that we need to be focusing on.
Well, I mean, a lot of people will agree with a lot of that, but they'll also say this is a government that has lost touch with a lot of things. Just to say, by the way, breaking news in the last minute, Lee Anderson has been introduced by Richard Tyson, Reform UK leader, as their first ever Reform UK MP. So that is now official. So we'll bring you some comments that he has made in just a couple of moments. But when we talk to things like what we invited you on to talk about, this extremism announcement, a lot of people saying a lot of this is just too little, too late. You've got a government that has been in power for 14 years. You has allowed the creeping, increasing influence and power of Islamist groups, a Batley Grammar School teacher, a cinema chain basically being bullied out of showing a film. And I know you've always spoken up on a lot of these things, to your credit, but actually very little action being taken. People chanting, from the river to the sea and holding up even, Hamas slogans and flags and things on marches every other week in London since the October the 7th massacre. This stuff has gone on far too long. Even extremism, I would say, I do think it's a massive extremism, trans activists who are stopping women speaking, who are basically trying to make sure anyone who doesn't agree with their ideology is hounded out of their jobs and out of polite society. There is so much going on that the government hasn't done anything about. Indeed, they've welcomed it into the civil service, they've welcomed it into our schools, welcomed it into the NHS, and they go, well, there's nothing we can do about it. And I think a lot of people, and I think a lot of my audience certainly, go, well, if you either care about this stuff or you don't, and announcing a new definition of extremism isn't really going to hack it.
Well, I agree with some of what you say, but I also say that we are an open and tolerant country. I think the Prime Minister's intervention, his speech outside of number 10, I think underlined the concerns exactly that as you've been outlining, given the fact that what's going on in Gaza and Israel has certainly inflamed matters. It's raised tensions with MPs being threatened, such as myself, intimidation and threats within communities, and of course, a very ugly by-election as well. So there is a question mark, and I think you allude to this, as to what it is to be British, what are the standards and values that we need to underline and accept. I think I'm right in saying that you spend a bit of time in the United States. I was born there, and you pledge allegiance to the flag every day. There's an awful lot of effort
I had to do that at school every morning,
yeah, exactly, to bind the country together. And I think we're a bit more reserved in that sense. But ultimately, this is the question mark for us as a country to debate and agree as to what we should be doing to ensure that we integrate and bind people together and that we don't see segregation. I will say that I've been affected by both elements of this. Outside my house, violent protests as such. You deal with those with a separate grouping of laws compared with those extremists that killed my brother in Bali in 2002. That was jihadism. That was terrorism. And what the concern has been expressed by these former Home Secretaries is the fact that we mustn't conflate the two. And I think the government recognizes that as we look to redefine what extremism is into modern day age. I would also say that we've got individuals who are choosing to test the boundaries of what is acceptable behavior. I never expected to have to legislate on protecting war memorials, for example. Yeah. You wouldn't anticipate anybody wanting to show an absence of reverence for what they are about. But such is the extremes in which some elements are choosing to go to today. That's why this additional legislation, this additional conversation needs to be had.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's a conversation needs to be had, but I think a lot of us wanted to have it rather sooner. Just to say that Lee Anderson is giving a little speech after moving to be a Reform UK MP, and he has said it is not controversial to be worried about illegal immigration, shoplifters getting away with it, hate marchers staging protests in London. That's obviously what he lost his whip for. But he says, we are giving up our streets to a minority of people who literally hate our way of life. He's right, isn't he?
Right. Can I now come back and say everything he said there, he's not offered a solution. And that goes back to my point as well. Populism, Trumpism, is all about building on people's fears and saying, look, the establishment haven't got it right. They don't offer any solutions. So absolutely right to point out some of the challenges that we face. But to do with the shoplifting and so forth, absolutely, it's been affected in Bournemouth as well. Now, I'm working with the Police and Crime Commissioner to get more police officers to make sure they're patrolling on the front line. Our police numbers went down because of the financial crisis that we inherited in 2010. They're now gone back up. So we're now addressing this. That's the way to deal with this, providing solutions, not just outlining the problems.
OK, well, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining us. That's former Defence Minister Tobias Ellwood. Commentator Sam Armstrong is back with me now. You've been chomping at the bit the whole way through that.
Look, I like Tobias. I think he's a good man. But we, the Conservative Party, are running exactly the strategy that Tobias has been calling for. Everything he said there, that's the strategy that's going on at the moment. And the Conservative Party are bottoming out their support in public. They could not be less popular. There comes a flaw at which point just a loyalty of traditional Conservative voters that have never voted for anyone else is all you've got. And that's where we are. He says that Lee Anderson's got no solutions. He may well be right. But what are the solutions right now being shown? What's happening to deal with the protests on the street? Nada, nothing. What's happening to deal with shoplifters? Nada, nothing. Nothing is happening. This country is going backwards. People can feel it, I'm afraid. And I say this as a Conservative Party member, and people are sick and tired. They are frustrated. That's why Lee Anderson is defecting. That's why hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not tens of millions of Conservative voters, people that want to vote for my party, his party, are defecting right now. Some to Reform, some to the Labour Party, and quite a lot more just saying, do you know what? be done with the lot of you. I'm simply not going to
And that's
vote.
my biggest worry. Well, Leanne, sort of some of the things he said in the press conference in the last couple of moments. Parliament doesn't understand what the British people want. He says, I want my country back. And he says he wants to be able to speak and expects to be able to speak his mind in politics. And he's hit out at the label controversial, saying his opinions are shared by people across the country, which, again, I think is probably the case, is it not?